lot of scholars somewhat debated how much of an influence she had on his writing, with the general consensus being either she had really little or if she had any, it was negative. And I came to a far more complicated conclusion, that she had influence. Her great influence was one actually I think most scholars miss, and that's in his very last novel, Personal Memoirs of Joan of Arc. And she did very little with writing it, but he knew she was dying. And he wrote a book the way he thought she would want a book written. It's a lot more flowery than his writing. You know, flowery writing is something he attacks in his essay on James Fenimore Cooper. And it's, I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of people think it's his worst book, okay? But I also think the book was written as a tribute to his wife. Now, some critics have suggested that Joan of Arc, the character Joan of Arc in this novel, is based on his daughter Susie, who died of spinal meningitis when she was 24. And this part's not original with me. I think it's more that Joan of Arc is a tribute to kind of a whole group of women, as he thought women were at their best. That they were pure, they were innocent, they knew what was right, they knew what was good, better than men did. So I think maybe Joan of Arc and his wife Livy, I'm sorry, his daughter Susie, maybe his other two daughters, Clara and Jean, served his wife, and maybe even Helen Keller. He had a short friendship with Helen Keller when she was young, and he actually talked his friend Henry Rogers, who was one of the 2 or 3, 4 richest guys in the country, to paying for her education at Vassar. I think it was Vassar Helen Keller went to. But Helen Keller was clearly an admirable person, and Mark Twain, if you met any woman he thought was admirable, it went beyond admiration to almost a reverence.
So then why has no one ever attacked this interesting life before?
Well, there were 2 books about them together, what are known as dual biographies. One by Reza Willis, which is, I think it's called The Courtship of Mark and Livy.
Is it Mark and Livy, just called Mark and Livy?
Maybe Mark and Livy, yeah, which focuses on the romantic part of their life early on. And then the other one you reminded me of.
Susan Harris, who's
Susan
here
Harris.
last month.
Yeah, and both of those were along the same lines. The Harris book, I can hardly remember. That doesn't mean it was a bad book. It just meant I didn't find stuff in it that I could use a lot. I did find quite a bit, I think, in the Willis book. I mean, when you're using secondary sources like that, I try not to use secondary sources, but I hope secondary sources will point me to primary sources. And the Willis book did that. Willis spends a good deal of time talking about Livy's medical problems when she was younger and speculating on what they may be. As some of you may know, when Livy was 15 or 16 years old in Elmira, New York, she slipped on the ice, and as a result of that, she spent 2 years in bed, unable to walk, and she was frail for all the rest of her life. There are some people who believe that she didn't have a real physical ailment, that it was typical of a woman, particularly from upper middle class or wealthy families in Victorian age, to think of themselves as frail. And that may be what she suffered from. Willis was able to point me towards doctors, for example, who have commented on this. I don't know a lot about medicine and stuff, so, but there are, as often happens with famous people, there will be doctors who will analyze their physical conditions. When I wrote the book Sex and Manifest Destiny, one of the things I came across was 2 books by 2 different doctors analyzing all the medical problems you can find in the journals of Lewis and Clark. It turns out the major medical problem was venereal disease. And the way of treating venereal disease at the time, it was Lewis, who was actually acted as a doctor. He got 3 days training. Jefferson sent him to Philadelphia to consult with doctors, and they gave a mercury pill. Nobody gets, they told him how to diagnose syphilis and gonorrhea, and when he gets syphilis, almost all of them dead, except Lewis and Clark didn't get it. At least it's not in the journals. Yeah. Well, that's led to a lot of speculation about whether or not they had a homosexual relationship, because they don't seem to have had sexual relationships with any of the Indian women they've had, but everyone else did, and most of them got venereal disease. And at least one doctor claims he tried to trace the histories of the other men after. Now, some of them just disappeared from history, and a lot of them are known to die unexpectedly and stuff. But he felt that to whatever extent he could trace it, he thinks at least half of them died from conditions caused by mercury poisoning. Now, mercury is no longer given to treat anything, I think, for no reason.
So that explains a little of your interest in manifest destiny. But just getting back to Louis, tell us a little. We sort of generally know she's from Elmira, that she was from a wealthy family. But tell us a little bit about that early part of her life.
She was born into a family that was middle class. Her father came from a small town near Syracuse. He got at age 17 or something to be an assistant manager of a local general store. That guy who owned that store bought a larger store there and became a Jervis Langdon, the manager of it, and then Jervis became manager of a third store. Then he saved enough money in his early 20s. He was able to go to Elmira and bought part interest in a lumber business, cutting trees, cutting it up, and selling it. And then in the late 1850s, he saved some more money and he bought an anthracite mine in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. Shamokin is not far from where I grew up in Exeter, Pennsylvania. Exeter is a little north of Wilkes-Barre, Shamokin south of Wilkes-Barre. And there was anthracite there. And there are three main types of coal: anthracite, bituminous, and lignite. Bituminous and lignite produce a lot of smoke and don't burn completely. Anthracite produces more fuel, almost no smoke, and that made anthracite extremely valuable during the Civil War. Among other things, Confederates tried to get it because the North had effectively locked off ships coming into Confederacy to deliver goods. So there would be guys like Rhett Butler, famously in Gone with the Wind, makes a lot of money by running around with a blockade runner. Okay, now I don't know if Rhett Butler did this, but many of the blockade runners had steamships that were powered by anthracite, because if there's no smoke, the enemy can't see them. Okay? If they made a mistake of using bitumen, and all the coal mines in the South are bituminous. Okay, the anthracite fields I grew up in, and where Shamokin is the largest anthracite field in the world. Okay? And so anthracite made him very, very wealthy. And it was while Livy was growing up that her family became very, very wealthy. They sold the house they were in, they built a mansion in downtown Elmira, which unfortunately no longer stands. Yeah, Livy and Mark were married in Paula there, and Steve was telling me today, there's a little shopping center there with 4 or 5 stores in, and one of them is a pizza parlor. And Steve thinks maybe the pizza parlor is exactly in the location of the parlor in which Mark and Livy got married. So at least it's still a parlor. If you go to Elmira, there's a lot of Mark Twain stuff, but almost nothing that is from that day, because the Langdon home is gone that he lived in. Now Mark Twain is buried there, Livy's buried there, all 4 of the children are buried there, the one son-in-law is buried there, and all the members of the Langdon family in the Woodlawn Cemetery. Both are buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery, by the way. I think 2,200 or 2,300 Confederate prisoners of war. Elmira was a notorious camp where many Confederate soldiers died, perhaps in deliberate retaliation for what happened in Andersonville, where tens of thousands of Union soldiers died as prisoners of war. And an interesting side story is there was a black man in Elmira who got the job $3 each to dig a grave for every one of those soldiers. He was an escaped slave. his name skips me.